This screencast is going to pick up with Puritan New England in your outline. So in England there are two groups who are very unsatisfied with the Anglican Church at this point because they feel it is still too Catholic and holds on to too many Catholic traditions. And those two groups are the Puritans and the Separatists. And we'll talk about the Separatists first. Now, the Separatists are also known as the Pilgrims. So when you remember learning about the Pilgrims on the Mayflower, you are talking about the Separatists. They left the Church of England because they wanted to get away from complete Catholic influence. So they completely wanted to separate from the Anglican Church and form their own religion. Now, they were being persecuted for this in England because you were supposed to follow the Anglican Church if you were an English citizen. And so they decided to flee England to establish their own Christian society in America. Now, this group that travels, of course, is known as the Pilgrims, and they will travel aboard a ship that y'all remember is the Mayflower, and the leader of this voyage, or this pilgrimage, was William Bradford. Now, while they're still on this boat, they create a very, very important document in American history known as the Mayflower Compact. It was a contract of sorts. They write and sign this, again, as they're still on the boat, as they're still aboard the Mayflower, and it was essentially a set of rules that everyone agreed to follow for the greater good. It established that the Pilgrims wanted peace and organization. Now, the Pilgrims are going to settle in Massachusetts, specifically the Plymouth colony, because we'll learn that there was two different Massachusetts colonies in the beginning. So they initially settled the Plymouth colony in Massachusetts. No, not like Plymouth Rock. Actually, Plymouth Rock is not historically, a real, there's a rock somewhere in Massachusetts that's labeled Plymouth Rock, but it's not real. Unfortunately, it's kind of a tourism scheme. But it is the Pilgrims who celebrate the first Thanksgiving with the Native Americans. That doesn't actually become a national holiday till much later, but they do have a feast with natives. They're kind of getting along with natives in the beginning. And the Pilgrims go on to establish a very prosperous colony in Plymouth. And one kind of aspect of the Pilgrims that was unique was that within their colony they had separation of church and state, and they did tolerate other religions. So there was religious freedom within the Plymouth colony, and that will be very different from their counterpart, the Puritans. Now, with the Puritans, they didn't necessarily want to completely break away from the Anglican Church, but they wanted to purify it from within and rid it of all Catholic influence. They also are going to receive some persecution in England, so they are going to begin fleeing to America for the same efforts to safely practice their religion. And the leader of the Puritan group is John Winthrop. He has a very famous quote, "We must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill." And you can kind of probably guess that interpretation, but what he essentially is saying is that the Puritans needed to set an example for the rest of society. When you're the city on the hill, means people are looking up at you, and so he's saying the Puritans should set examples for the rest of society, and that they were chosen by God to be an example for others. Now they will also settle in Massachusetts, but they settle what's known as the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And while they also established a representative government similar to what the Pilgrims would establish, they had a theocracy. A theocracy. Keyword there is theo, meaning God, because there was no separation of church and state in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The laws were reflective and supported by the religion of the Puritans, and other religions were not tolerated. Now, they were very strict about this, and if you challenged any of the Puritan leaders' ideals, there was the risk of trouble for sure. So just some examples here of people who went against the Puritans and had to pay for it. Roger Williams was a Massachusetts Bay resident who taught against the theocracy. He thought theocracy was not the best practice, and so he's actually going to be banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and he is forced to kind of flee to the Rhode Island area, and he actually establishes that Rhode Island colony where other religions were tolerated and there was a separation of church and state. And so that's kind of how we get the establishment of Rhode Island. And Hutchinson is going to be a female Massachusetts Bay resident who was also exiled, similarly to Williams. She kind of took on a leadership role and made challenges against the Puritan faith and the government of the Puritans living in Massachusetts Bay. And for a female to be kind of challenging those leadership positions, that was considered especially against the grain, and so they're also going to banish her from the colony, and she actually, I think, settles in Rhode Island as well. Probably the most notable incident of mass chaos resulting from challenging the Puritan religion and the Massachusetts Bay Colony was the incident that becomes known as the Salem Witch Trials. So essentially, a few young girls were having some seizure-like episodes and symptoms, and doctors couldn't explain what was happening to them. And so a few of the girls said they believed witchcraft was being performed on them by some of their neighbors. And, to be a witch, or to, that was kind of considered like the devil, the devil's work. And it becomes this mass, blame game where people start pointing the finger at each other because they're scared of getting, accused themselves. And accusations just kind of start flying left and right. And it's that real scary mob, mass hysteria mentality. And because of this, at the end of it, 19 people are actually going to be hanged for witchcraft, both male and female. And this is what the play, The Crucible, is about. And a lot of the characters are historical. But there is no, it's all pretty much false what happened, and there really was no witchcraft going on, but they did execute people. And I think there's a Salem Witchcraft Museum near Boston that you can travel to. Alright, we'll take a few notes about some of the other colonies that are getting established, and then we will stop here. So, first of all, New York and New Jersey. Charles II is the successor and the son of Charles I. He becomes King of England, and he finds himself in a lot of debt. So, in order to repay certain individuals, he gives land in the colonial Americas to those people, basically paying them back with land deeds instead of money. And so he gives his brother James, who was the Duke of York, territory that used to be the Netherlands, which is where we get the term New York actually created. So he gives James what is present-day New York. And then he also gives away New Jersey to, I don't think there's a name, and you don't need to know any name, but basically just to English nobles who he was trying to pay back. He gave them land instead of debt. So both New Jersey and New York were given away to pay off debt. And as far as the Carolinas, he's going to give those two regions away as well to wealthy aristocrats who had supported him earlier and who he owed money to. And just so you kind of know, there was two kind of distinguishing factors between North and South Carolina. North Carolina was kind of used as the overflow of poorer Virginia families who just needed to spread out, and they moved south into the North Carolinian region, whereas South Carolina is going to be used for more wealthy plantation owners, and we're going to see them soon be a primary consumer and user of the African slave trade. And then Pennsylvania is the last thing we're going to talk about today. So another example of Charles II giving out land to pay off debt is when he gave William Penn some land in the area of Pennsylvania, which is where it gets its name from, obviously, Penn in Pennsylvania, to pay off a debt that he actually owed Penn's father. So he owed Penn's father money. Father passed away, passes on the land to his son instead, William Penn. And William Penn was a Quaker. And so Pennsylvania is going to kind of become a safe place, a refuge for other Quakers potentially migrating to America. Quakers are pacifists, meaning they don't embrace war or violence, and so they are going to be persecuted in England if they aren't willing to serve in the army or fight in wars. And so it's kind of a dangerous thing for them to stay and be openly Quaker back at home in England. So they leave and feel that they can travel to the safe place that is Pennsylvania. And William Penn is the man who is the cartoon figure on Quaker oatmeal labels. So I always get asked that every year. Alright, please write down any questions you have, and we can address those in class on Monday. I hope you all have a good weekend.